Hey, what's up? Mr. Bill here. Today I wanted to talk to you about a big update that we have done for Slap. The first update is on the shape module. We've introduced this B mode, which I'll talk about in a bit. And the second update is all of these effects modules in Slap are now their own VSTs and can be loaded independently of Slap and will be available to anybody who owns Slap. So to explain the shape module and what inspired it, I first have to explain what the Beats warp mode does in Ableton. So in Ableton, you have this warp mode called Beats, and then you have this secondary thing in that warp mode called Preserve, which lets you preserve divisions in the sample, and I'll show you what that means. So if I have this on transients mode, and then inside of this clip, wherever there's a pseudo warp marker, so one of these little gray flag things, which you can double click and make a real warp marker if you want. I just call these little gray ones pseudo warp markers because they're like not set in stone or whatever, but like let's just say I do make all of these real warp markers. You don't have to. The Beats warp mode will see them either way. And then I put this on one of these different loop modes here. You'll notice, so basically the way I've gotten to this file is I've just made a little white noise thing in Operator that just loops over and over again, and the envelope turns down pretty quickly, so it sounds like this. And then I just loop that over and over again. And then I froze and flattened that, and then I stretched it out to be 4 times its length. So now you get this. And the reason I stretched it is so you could hear the artifacts of this warp mode. So if I have this on the double arrow and I have it set to transients, you can hear it's basically looping this first bit or this second bit maybe over and over again until it gets to the next transient. So I'm not doing any of that looping, it's doing that using this warp mode. And then if I have this warp mode set to forwards and backwards, it'll do the same thing, except as it gets to that next transient, it's going to scrub forwards and backwards through the sample, and you'll hear that as well. And then finally, you have this warp mode where it has a forward arrow and then it like hits a wall. And what that does is from the transient, it just starts cutting volume immediately and it doesn't do any looping. And if you turn this number down, it just tightens up that envelope at which it's cutting that volume. So basically the shape module was inspired by this version of this warp mode. So if I go to say this hi-hat loop here, which I have the shape module on, and we just play it. Let's have it on repitch mode. Repitch mode is just like a vinyl warping mode. It will just sort of, as you stretch it, it'll just pitch the clip up and down. So actually, just to show you what I mean by that, this is what it sounds like normally. And if I stretch it to 4 times its length, it's going to be 4 octaves down. And just to prove that, we could just unwarp this and just pitch this 4 octaves down, and we would end, or 3 octaves or 2 octaves maybe, and we would end up in the same position. Same thing. Okay, so let's go back to Beats mode here and turn this on to the transient warp mode, and then start turning this down, and I'll show you what it sounds like. So notice how it tightened it up a lot. So that's exactly what the shape module is doing now on option B. So before it had option A and it was doing a similar thing, but it was doing it, in my opinion, too intense. Like you would only have to turn this up a couple of % and it would essentially be blunting the audio a ton. So now we have option B, and that behaves more similarly to Ableton's Beats warp mode. Then you have this snap control, and this is basically a transient shaper. So this then does the opposite of what this does. So whereas the warp mode here in Ableton, or exactly what shape is doing, is just detecting the transient and then essentially turning it down something like this every time it sees a transient. So it's just doing like this kind of thing wherever those pseudo warp markers are in the clip, then what the snap mode is doing is the opposite thing, which is every time it sees a transient, it's turning it up like this. So you've kind of got like the best of both worlds. You've got something that's turning the tails down, and then another thing that's turning the transients up. So it's basically a really powerful transient shaper. So you might ask, well, if I already have this functionality in Beats mode in Ableton, then why would I need a plugin that does it? That's a good question. So I thought of some reasons why. So first of all, if I load a sample in, this is a noisier hi-hat loop at 172 BPM, and I'm loading it into a 140 BPM session. So if I play this on complex, you'll hear that it doesn't sound right. There's like some artifacts on it. Whereas it's supposed to sound like this. So it sounds mostly correct, but to me it sounds a little warped, and I personally hate the sound of warped artifacts. So in general, when I'm putting a sample in and warping it to the whatever my track is, I usually use repitch. And then if I want to get the brightness back, I'll usually just sort of add brightness here. So that's all good and well, but now we've used our warp mode, and you can't add two warp modes in Ableton. So currently you would have to consolidate this, and then you would go to Beats warp mode, throw it on here, and then you could do the warp mode. So there's just another way to do it now with a VST. You could have this on repitch, and then no need to consolidate or render it to a new channel or anything like that. You could just put slap shape on. And there it is, done. Another reason you might want this in a VST is if you have a bunch of drums that you're doing in MIDI like this. So normally if you would want to apply the Beats warp mode to some hi-hats in MIDI like this, or anything in MIDI, you would have to create another channel, take an input and record it in. And now you have the audio clip available to you to do the Beats warp mode thing, and then you could mute the top clip and cool, now you've done it. Or you could just slap shape on it and turn this thing up, and then it's done. Another use case is, let's say you want to do this to all of your drums at once. So you have your drum group here, sounds like this. Previously, you would need to create a channel, take the input from that group, record that group into a new channel. And again, now you have the audio clip in which you can apply the Beats warp mode to tighten up your drums. I would personally never do this because you probably want all of your drums separated. So if you ever want to change the mix or change a sample or anything, you have everything separated. So now you can just put shape on your entire bus. Another cool use of having this as a VST is if you were to turn this Beats mode all the way down. So you turn an Amen break into that and you're like, it's still not quite tight enough. Well, you would have to consolidate, and then you would have to apply that same process again and again until you get it to a point where you think it's tight enough. Not that I really ever thought that it wasn't tight enough turning this thing all the way down to 0, but let's say we have this on 50, right? So it's like this. Sounds okay. Well, now we can just put shape on it a bunch of times, and we can basically apply that tightening and transient adding process multiple times. Now it's super tight. One more use case is, let's say that somebody sends you stems and they send you all of the drums in one stem like this. And you want to create a sidechain trigger out of that. Well, now you can just put an EQ, a gate, and then shape on the end of it, just to basically isolate the kick and the snare out of this file. It doesn't really matter how it sounds, you're really just using it as a transient to control a sidechain compressor. So I just put that in an audio effect rack and layered it with a dry signal, but that one is turned off, so you never actually hear that one. And then the dry signal just goes through, and then you go to your sidechain group and you take your input from that channel, and then you just take your input on the sidechain compressor from the sidechain trigger post effects, so it's after the slap shape thing is doing its thing, and then you get a perfect sidechain trigger from a whole drum file. Perfect. Another thing to note is other people in other DAWs may not have this warp mode available to them, so now you do. Anyway, this is just a quick look into some of the updates that have been added to Slap and some of the things that you can do with them. To find out more, go to the link in the description, the Audio one. And remember, all of these other modules now are also their own singular VSTs, which all have their own infinite uses as well. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, hope you enjoyed this update, and thanks for watching. Have a good day.